everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hair of the Dogcast. Still at SGDQ 2019, still surviving, not sleeping. But we're going to get through a few more days here. We have another special guest today. He was very heavily involved in the competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee community. He's been a...
Once upon a time.
But it is important. He's been a mainstay at GDQ speedrunning games such as Sylvan Tale, Skyblazer, Timecop, and many more. He is developing a device called Chimera that is a universal controller remapper, world record holder in Dragster, and recently a published author. Omnigamer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how has Games Done Quick been treating you so far?
You know, it's actually been a really good event. So I'm on the tech staff, so we have to deal with kind of putting out the emergency fires. Things don't quite work as well as they need to. Some runners have very specific requests as far as what they play on, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing too significant has come up this event. Pretty much everything we've been able to deal with without having to run around too crazily. But yeah, it's been great so far.
Yeah, the punch-out blindfolded run. Mm-hmm. I saw you on stage, and you were trying to think to keep the people from talking too much. At least you had a presence at the end of the stage.
Oh yeah, that was just something to kind of keep it in line with the rules of the blindfolded side of things. And it's just at the beginning they had asked, okay, everybody keep quiet, let him kind of work on this. He needs to work on specific audio cues, but. Sometimes you get into the moment, and especially when he's doing the menus, you had audience participation. It's like, no, yes. It's just,
yeah.
No, we can't let him do his thing. It's hurting more than helping.
It's hard to tell a whole crowd of people that all want to yell and become memes not to do too much, but that was amazing. Let's talk about your beautiful book, Speedrun Science, A Long Guide to Short Playthrough.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, this just came out very recently.
The first copies rolled off the printer in early April. So that's when it started to be distributed to everybody who pre-ordered, and now you've got copies available for whoever.
Yeah, I unfortunately found out about it days before Games Done Quick here. Otherwise, I would have read the entire thing. But you loaned me your copy, and I had a good look through the whole thing. It is a tome. It is a textbook. It is comprehensive. The road to this release has been going on for some time now, right?
Yeah, I think I did my first interviews for the book in 2014, and the bulk of it was probably written in 2016, 2017, and then the last bit of time after that was all setting up kind of the formatting, getting pictures that were just right, diagrams, illustrations, that kind of thing, and just the overall layout of the book, and that ended up taking a lot longer than I expected, but I think that we did an excellent job with kind of placing and getting material that supports just beyond the words that I've written.
Yeah, it's beautifully illustrated. I saw just showing Alucard's different run speeds versus shield dashing and the comparisons. Beautifully laid out. A lot of cool little interviews in there too. So you said you started back in 2014 and you knew you were working towards a book right when you started that?
Not exactly. When I started out, it was just the idea of I'm going to make a guide to all things speedrunning. So my main goal was to actually get other people motivated, so I wasn't the only one working on it. There's a post on SDA I made quite a long time ago trying to gather input and participants who would help to kind of contribute to this. There was a lot of interest in it, but there wasn't a lot of actual help. I mean, it's a lot of work. I knew that going into it, and people are going to play games.
Oh, yes.
So at some point, I just decided, okay, I've got the interest and the motivation right now. I'm just going to start doing it and work towards getting it done. And over the course of just kind of setting out some initial chapters, kind of getting into my writing style, what I wanted to include on it, I was connected with Fangamer, and they have a publishing arm. So I was able to work with them on getting editor, getting graphics and illustration folks to help out, and just help to make it a full package well beyond anything that I could have hoped to do by myself. And that's a really fantastic partnership.
And I think 2013 was the first time you attended GDQ, right? You ran Timecop?
I believe GDQ 13 I had Timecop and Skyblazer in the schedule, yeah.
Cool. And so very quickly after starting to attend, you were getting the book started.
Something like that, yeah. I had started speedrunning overall approximately 2011. I think I'd started right around then or just before. And that was my first major opportunity to actually attend an event. I watched some of the prior events, and they looked like fantastic times, and something that, at least at the time, it was something that I could get into. It was a new kind of gaming outlet that I could pursue that was beyond my prior interests with competitive Smash Brothers, playing other all the cool things back then were MOBAs. Is just play with all my college friends, and well, people get real lives. They move on, and you just lose out on that opportunity. And speedrunning came in as just something that I could do by myself and still get a lot of that same feeling.
Yeah. This is my first time attending a GDQ, and I've always loved watching all the runs and seeing the community on there. It is so much different being here in person. You actually don't see as many speed runs while you're here. You're so busy doing other things and spending time with other people, going to the arcade. Mm-hmm. In the book, you kind of have it blocked out into foundations and process. Mm-hmm. So you start off kind of covering the history of what speedrunning is, and kind of like the first game that is considered the first speedrun is the Atari 2600 game Dragster.
That's one of the earliest examples I can find of. You think back to these old arcade and Atari games and all these things of that type, your main metric for how well are you doing is score most often. And it wasn't until later that you could start to get time to be introduced as, here's a mechanic that you can use that will be able to compare you against somebody else. And even, so this was back in the 80s, late 70s. That was among one of the first games that actually had a timer. Mm-hmm. And because of the way that Activision, which published the game, had structured they had a newsletter, basically, encouraging people to send in their best times, and then they'd list it with a name recognition after doing some verification on a photo. So that was kind of like the first stint of, here's a competitive scene oriented around a time-based game.
And was it through the book that you sort of spent a little time looking at the Dragster world, the false world record?
Yeah, the main reason that I came onto Dragster at all is just as part of what I just described with the Activision's newsletter. There had been a time that basically had a big mythos about it. It was something that, oh yeah, this is the first speedrunner. He found some way to play the game that the developers never anticipated. He managed to get a faster time than they believed was actually possible, even knowing all the internals and so on. And there's a whole bunch of other stories related to that.
There was a mythos around that before you had started to investigate it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Like, the only reason that I came across it is because it was commonly cited as, oh, yeah, what is the earliest speedrun? It was probably like that. But for the purposes of my book, I just wanted something that showed something early enough, and how the story was built up was kind of perfect for what I wanted to describe. Is, here's somebody who used something creative, something outside of expectations to achieve a faster time, get faster optimization than what was expected. And it's like, all right, this is great. This is just something I can mention. The problem is that the details really didn't stack up. I couldn't find a description of what actually had happened anywhere that satisfied what you can do in the game.
The record keeping back then seems like it was a little more protected. They didn't really have videos available for people to watch.
There's a lot of different pieces to it. When you go back this far, I mean, you're talking about potentially just photographs. So people taking a Polaroid of their setup and just, yeah, here you go. And then people judging it out after the fact. I've
photoshopped many pictures of me with Halle Berry. Lo and behold, I'm still not dating her. We'll see if we can get that sorted out. Yeah. So then you get a little bit more into the Nintendo Power. They were kind of helping keep track of some of the speedrunning scores in the earlier episode or issues.
Yeah, that was one of the unique things with Nintendo Power just as a whole. They had it went through various name iterations, but it was like the Arena or Player's Choice Challenges, things like that, where they basically would pick some series of games and issue a challenge for that. And it's like, oh, get a certain score here, or get a certain time for this game, report your ending time. And by this era, so it was early to mid 90s, you're starting to have more games that have timers in them. It might not be like the scoring mechanic that primarily differentiates things, but you look at Metroid. You can go through and basically find a way to get to the end. It reports a time, and then you can just take a picture of that, and that's your submission.
Yeah.
And not only that, but just the way that those games started to be structured is you get a bonus for completing it at a certain time, changes up the ending screen, that kind of thing. So it incentivizes playing fast, even though that's not really the main point of the game.
Much like in Suikoden 2 with the Clive side quest.
Something like that.
I've never seen that myself because I don't speed run the game. I usually get too sidetracked and just want to listen to the music and sit around.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but I have seen it online, which is great. You cover Morimoto's first tool-assisted speed run in the book and kind of how that whole culture came about. And I know you've done a little bit of task running, at least when you were doing the Dragster stuff.
A little bit. I wouldn't say that I am a tasser, but I'm well versed in using those types of tools.
Yeah, and that's how you were able. You discovered that, or did you work with taskvideos.org that it was impossible?
Oh, the actual Dragster side of it?
Yeah.
So it was my work alone, at least, that started out. I tried to reverse engineer the game, and that basically just means looking at the machine code and determining kind of how everything interacted, and then looking at the possibilities, turning it into a mathematical model, which I turned into just a spreadsheet. So you can go and play Dragster in a Microsoft Excel file if you really want to. And that's basically how I use to try and figure out what is an optimal time. But even among that, it was basically, if you give yourself certain allowances, allow yourself to essentially cheat and get a state that really you cannot get to in the game, getting towards those times that were claimed is still kind of well out of reason. And it's a diminishing returns kind of effect. The better and better you get, the harder it is to improve that next increment. And in this case, so like the claim time is a 551.
It's interesting that the company said 554 was what they thought was the best.
So again, that's a little bit of misinformation that comes from the mythos, is that's actually was only recorded as part of what that individual had said part of the story was. Is he reported, they said that it was a 554.
Okay.
So we don't actually have a quote from Activision or any of the engineers. I actually talked to David Crane, who programmed the game, and he basically said he had no solid recollection that they did anything like that. We have a theory that if it did happen, and maybe they told him offhand because he had a working relationship with them, they would fly him out to trade shows and things like that, it was basically not something that was a true simulation of the game, and instead they assigned some mathematical guessing, assuming optimal things that may not have actually been possible in game.
Were you surprised at some of the backlash that kind of came from you? Just these are the facts.
From my perspective, there wasn't really a whole lot of backlash, I would say. Initially, there was a lot of misunderstanding, and that's a lot of what I tried to set out and kind of fix up is, all right, well, this is what I've said. I'm opening it up to peer review, essentially, so people can look at it and tell me, oh, you did this wrong. Like, oh, okay, great, I can fix that. But in the same way, there's a lot of people just like that come through, they have this notion of what it is that I did without fully understanding it, and they say, well, it's flawed because of this. And like, no, I did account for that. And it's just kind of forms a back and forth of setting out what it is that I actually have captured and am showing, and what it is that they think actually occurred.
So after you developed the tool-assisted perfect version of the game, how long did it take you of playing the game to actually capture the record?
That's a little bit of a loaded question. Initially, I didn't have any desire to actually try and get that time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between here is the theoretical perfect performance in a task, and here is a method for a human to get the same time. There's actually very little leeway on being able to do it as a human, but you have to account for some certain things that actually make it possible to perform by hand. So certain strategies that I can use in the tasks, simply not possible. Like things like being able to flick it at precisely the right amounts of time, quickly in sequence is just not something that you can count on. But basically there were ways to kind of make it easier, like to reduce the total number of shifts that you need, to reduce essentially your starting luck. There is something of a luck factor. You have essentially a 1 in 8 chance of being in the right, I call it a seed, to start a race and actually wind up with a possible finish time at that. And it was just a lot of determining, how do I make this as easy as possible for a human? And I put out a series of videos and different basically explanations of how to do that. People were trying for a while using some of those strategies. One night I found an even easier way, put that out, and then just for fun I essentially started trying to practice it a little bit. And then that night I was really surprised I managed to get it just after some practice of the later steps, and lucked out. And there's a video of that, and you can see my reactions.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
So awesome. This book is very comprehensive. So when you get into the latter half, you're covering all of the vernacular. You're talking about all the different types, all of the different definitions, some of the skills. But it's still, there's a billion different games, and they all have their own little speedrunning quirks. Did you have a lot of extra material that didn't get into the book? Was it hard to pare that down?
I would say that there's a lot of content that I could have also included. It's not content that had been created yet. It's basically ideas that kind of further show some of the concepts that I try and talk about, but it's a lot of extra time to talk about them, or like it's kind of edge case sort of things that is suitable for only a small subset of games. And like, absolutely, there's a bunch of things that I would have liked to also include, or things that I thought of later, but it came down to, all right, I need to end this somewhere, or it's just never going to come out.
Yeah.
Cut myself off somewhere that is reasonable. Do I feel like it has enough content to be productive and useful? And I reached that point. There's still like some sections that I feel like I could have gone back and done a little better, structured slightly differently, but overall I'm really happy with what we came out with.
Yeah. Is the book kind of geared towards a certain kind of a speedrunning fan, or is it for maybe a novice? Is it kind of broad enough to where everyone can take something out of it?
This was one of the biggest challenges with writing the book, was keeping the audience broad enough. And when it initially started, I intended it to be a guide for speedrunners, people who kind of were already invested into the community, and it's just they need some help figuring out kind of these other practices and stages that they might not be as intuitive or familiar to them. So things like applying scientific method, things like going in and actually setting up test cases, reverse engineering games, that kind of thing. Like those are fairly uncommon skill sets. A lot of runners might do that without actually knowing that they are, but I wanted to give some kind of formula process to that. But as I was writing it out, I basically was starting to take feedback from a variety of folks, a lot of them who weren't speedrunners but were enthusiasts about speedrunning. So they really loved to see everything that had gone into it. They wanted to kind of know where it came from. They wanted to know how you basically make decisions on how you're going to make this a category, how are you going to decide whether or not to allow a glitch, things like that.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had a lot of my own kind of opinions from observing how that evolved over the years. So that's something that I could also include and share and make it a little broader. So the end product is something that is aimed at basically anybody who is interested about speedrunning. If you are a grizzled speedrunning veteran, there's something in there for you. There is absolutely going to be things that you haven't really thought about or that just haven't been part of your speed games of choice so far that you might be able to apply towards them. If you're completely new, you're watching Games Done Quick for the first time and you're like, okay, I need to know more about this. I take you through pretty much everything that you need to know on what it is, what people are doing, what they actually want to get from speedrunning, and then how, if you wanted to take a game and investigate it, route it, and perform runs of it from scratch. And that's what I wanted from it, and I feel like I did a good job. We'll see. There's still plenty of time for feedback.
From what I've seen, it looks like a huge success, and I know I've heard a lot of people talking about it around the convention, so congratulations on that. That's a project you've been working on for 5 years.
Plenty of time.
Are you going to have some more time for your next project? Do you have something lined up that you're going to be working on?
Yeah, well, then my next big project I've announced. I've done a lot of the design work and architecture for it. It's a universal controller remapper.
The Chimera.
Yes, I call it Chimera tentatively, and the name itself kind of doesn't really do a good job of describing all of the things that I intend to provide as features for this device. It actually started out as a project where I wanted to make a more general purpose input viewer. So a lot of streamers will try to set up some kind of special device that'll monitor their controller signals and be able to display it on a computer so that they can provide it as a neat little graphic on their stream. And they're kind of a pain in the butt to make. They're nothing too difficult, but there's just no, you can't just go to somewhere and buy one right now. You basically have to come up with it yourself. Mm-hmm. And I was going to make something like that, but I started to think about, well, there's other things I can do when I have certain setup and architecture where, let's say that you're running a particular game. The one example that I come back to a lot is on NES, there's a game, G.I. Joe, American Hero. There's a particular trick in that game where you can cancel, basically, you can swap between your weapon, which is a gun, and your fist. Mm-hmm. And to do a lot of damage quickly, you can basically continually swap between a punch attack and firing your gun and swap them back and forth. The problem here is that the fire button is on B, and the swap button is on select. And so you got to do some crazy handhold to actually make that effective. And really, it's not something that you can pull off effectively enough to actually use in a run the way that it's set up.
And it's a universal controller remapper, right? Mm-hmm. So how many different controllers are you trying to have this thing work for? That sounds incredibly daunting. It should work with just about any controller, and I mean that from the wired type that you'd be connecting in your NES, your Atari, your GameCube, N64, whatever. Mm-hmm. All of those, as well as being able to output it to any console. So if you have the idea that you want to, for whatever reason, play SNES on your Dreamcast, okay, I can come up with something that will allow you to do that, and hopefully the way that I'm architecting it, you won't actually have to buy like that many extra components to do it. Sure.
But it's something that is upgradable. So if there's new controllers that need to be supported, it's something that I can add in as a firmware fix. But it's also the particular parts that I'm looking at are pretty modern, and they'll have a Bluetooth controller inside, so you can actually use modern game controllers, which are mostly some variety of Bluetooth. Yeah. You can think of connecting your Switch controller, your PS4 controller, whatever, mm-hmm. And you can interact with the device with that too. So you can use your Xbox One controller and end up using it on an S, just as a matter of comfort.
Yeah.
And that's something that right now, as far as I know, doesn't exist.
Do you have a potential release date for this device? Are you're just getting started with it?
I've done a lot of the background work, but I haven't done any of the implementation work yet. So throughout, basically after this event, I'm hoping to get more into the weeds of actually putting down code, making it happen, and I hope to have some prototypes available for some selected streamers and gamers to test out and report back to me. And then who knows, maybe I'll have the ability to set up a product platform in next spring or so.
Cool. Do you have prior experience doing projects like that?
My background is I do a fair bit of kind of hardware work, embedded software, so low-level programming, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I haven't done anything specific. Well, I've done some other device-related work in the past with controllers. So
The Mash Attack being one?
Yep.
Yeah.
I made Mash Attack, which is a button mashing tester analyzer. You basically come up, you hit the button for a set amount of time. It'll record basically your rate over time and provide you with some feedback on, well, where you need to improve, and hopefully how you can actually do that better so you're not hurting yourself while you're trying to do it.
Many thumbs have been broken.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And is that that's just something you kind of did for yourself? Is that it's not really sold, right? It's just
no. That is a one-off. I made like a custom set of boxes that are built around exactly testing that, and I bring them to events sometimes and just set it up somewhere, have people come along and they try it out.
I didn't get a chance, but I saw you down there earlier with it. Looked like a lot of fun. Let's kind of get back to how you got into gaming, the Smash Brothers community. How did you get involved with that when you were, how young were you when you started?
I believe I went to my first tournament when I was 14. So well over a decade ago now.
Time flies.
It does. But it was something that I was very lucky in that my parents were pretty supportive of that. It's not too often that you have an opportunity. Hey, I'm going to go and spend time with 30 other guys that I've never met before that I talked to online in another state. Can you take me over there? And like actually having them say, yeah, sure, is really kind of opened up a lot for me in terms of basically feeling part of something. Back in that day and age, rules are very different than they are now. It was very much kind of like a homely experience. You would typically travel to somebody else's house where they would put everybody up for the night, and you find your own corner of the floor in the basement, and that would be where you live.
Sleep under the table if you had
Oh
to.
yeah, and certainly lots of people would, but but it was a lot of fun. And I mean, as I grew into it more, I became more involved with kind of the organization. I started to run some of my own tournaments. I was a moderator on Smashboards, which was the main community hub, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I did a lot with it. Eventually, I spent a season as a MLG tournament director while they had it.
You were pretty young at the time, too, right?
I was 17.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity for me at the time. It was my first kind of experience doing event sort of work like that.
And then everyone kind of moved off to college, or a lot of the close community kind of split up?
It's just one of those things. We got older. The old crew kind of went their own ways as they pursued their own interests and that kind of thing. I played a little bit in college and brought my roommates up to speed.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things. It's just if you're far enough away from active participation, you can't really play at the level that you want. You can't keep up with the progression of the metagame and that kind of thing. And really, I had already had my fun with it. It's something that has some really fun memories for me. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot about just gaming and organization and that kind of thing. But it was not something that I really had it was not a major priority for me to keep up with anymore as I was trying to go through my own studies, and especially with where I was. It was essentially way out in the sticks, so getting anywhere was difficult.
I look back on we had Halo LAN parties all the time.
Oh yeah.
And that was my scene that I had to kind of move away from. I noticed you have a picture with wife of the husband and wife duo.
Oh yeah.
In there. Have you seen that 5-hour Smash Brothers documentary on YouTube?
I
think it's like 5 hours. It's huge.
There's several episodes, I think. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure I've seen most, if not all of it, and I actually get name dropped in a couple places in it too.
I was thinking you might need to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. What my main early contribution, at least as far as Smash stuff goes, is that I was a pretty prolific video hoarder. So in the early times, like a lot of it was pre-YouTube or before people could actually use YouTube all that well. So the main way that people would share videos is through some peer-to-peer services. And I would get all the videos I could. I would make actually a lot of videos. I was one of the few people who had kind of a recording setup way back then, and I would put up content. And that was how people shared that kind of stuff. So a lot of people have fond memories of downloading things out of my share, and that was kind of their introduction to whatever was happening elsewhere in the community.
Yeah. Are you, you must have played Smash Ultimate then?
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts on that?
It's a fun game. It's kind of, whether you call it being older and wiser, it's just, I see the things that I like in the game, and I know the way that I enjoy playing it now, but it's not something that I would consider pursuing a competitive interest in. It's more that because I've had that experience in the past, I know what that would require of me, and I know that I simply do not have the time or the motivation to keep up with that kind of level of motivation anymore.
I know you mentioned in the book one of the reasons you kind of got away from the Smash community is the competition. It gets really intense and it's kind of overwhelming.
It can be. It's more that it didn't fit with my kind of the mental aspects that I enjoyed most out of it, which was challenging myself versus other people, but I didn't so much care about winning or losing. I wanted to have a good match with whoever I was playing with, and I could put up a pretty solid fight, but it wasn't something that I was deeply attached to the point of, man, I need to like put in 30 hours in the lab next week so I can be prepared for this tournament. It was just, man, I really want to play with a goofy character right now and show some people some stuff that they've never seen.
Yeah, no one wants to play as Pichu.
No, well, you say that, but I was a Kirby main, and Kirby is the worst in Melee. And if anybody tells you differently, they're wrong.
Okay. I was always a Roy main.
Okay.
I just spammed up BM. Pretty cheap.
I'm a
pretty cheap smasher, but hey, it works. If someone's going to keep running into my attacks, I'm not going to change them. And so yeah, you got away from that, and then that's when speedrunning kind of became something you really got into. AGDQ 2011 is kind of when you mentioned really starting to pay attention. Was there some initial runs from that particular event that you were gravitating towards?
It wasn't necessarily even the runs at AGDQ. It was more that just realizing that the scene had grown quite a bit. I mean, like I said, with the early video sharing things, we came across a lot of other videos that weren't necessarily Smash related. So I saw a lot of speedruns through that, and it's just like, wow, this stuff is wicked cool. But it's kind of just something of acknowledging it. It's like, okay, that exists somewhere, and I'm not paying attention to it. So I knew about it from much earlier on, and it wasn't until, I think actually this is what caused me to look into it at all, is I was looking through my old cache of videos, and I found some of these speedrun videos, and I'm like, huh, this was really neat. I wonder if they've beaten this. It was like a Red Scarlet Super Metroid run, which is way, way old now. But so I went over to SDA, and I think right at that time they were actually doing the marathon. So it was on the page, and it's like, okay, I can watch this. This is pretty neat. And then further on from that, it was just, you know, I have this hankering to play all these games that I went through as a kid, and I'm interested to see them again. So this gives me an excuse to play through them and look for something different, something that I didn't experience, or some new way to get through the game again. And it took off from there. I really enjoyed it, and that's what caused me to start to become more involved. I would pay attention to when there were events much more closely, and yeah, that's what started the whole thing.
I remember when I found out in Suikoden 2 you can just push that gate. That blew my mind.
Oh, the Matilda gate.
The Matilda
everybody's favorite bug.
Yeah, survive a couple of battles and you'll be overpowered the rest of the game. So how many different speedruns have you done at Games Done Quick now? You've done quite a few.
I think I've had, I think last I counted it was 15 different appearances at Games Done.
Appearances.
Yeah. So plenty of games. I would say the vast majority of the games that I've speedrun have appeared at a Games Done Quick at some point or another. There's still a handful that haven't, and I'll keep working on it. But someday.
I know you recently mentioned that you want to truly be an Omnigamer and speedrun a game for every system you own.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I'd get drunk and say that I can do something, but then I actually have to do it. How is that monumental task going?
Honestly, it hasn't really started yet, just because I've been wrapped up with a lot of my duties for Games Done Quick stuff, for getting Chimera ready. But it's more of this is a long-term thing. It's as I'm doing speed runs, I basically keep that in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, I want to pick up a new game. Let's branch out. We'll find something from Game Boy Color. That'll be cool. And one of the things I like to do on my stream is just go through the library and start looking for, well, that's a funny name. Let's see what it's like, and play through the game for 10 minutes and find out whatever quirks there are. And using that method, actually, I found a lot of games. It's just like, wow, this is really neat. I want to try to take this further, speedrun it, see what happens.
Yeah, I love grabbing random games on my emulators at home and things you've never heard of. I remember stumbling upon Ninja Baseball Batman.
Oh boy!
And wow, what a gem that is!
Oh yeah.
I thought the name must have been just a misprint or something, but no, you are on an airplane fighting airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Too many airplanes on my plane. So you're also were in RPG Limit Break. You ran Suikoden 2.
That's right.
Yes, and you said you routed that game.
So that's been a long process too. That was actually among the first 3 or 4 games that I started to speedrun. So long time ago, I routed it out. Kind of, we'll call it like my early growing period, where I was kind of figuring out here's a good process to do things in. I did a couple runs, but I mean it's a long RPG. The best at that time period was I finished in 6:43 or so.
6:43.
6 hours 43 minutes, and that was comparable to what we knew of some of the Japanese runs at the time, which actually ran with some different rules. But that's beside the point.
How many characters did you get on a run like that?
You usually try to minimize the number of characters you get just to cut down on things, unless they have some potential to save time. So
yeah.
It's on the order of 40 to 50 characters. A lot of them are just flat required, so
right.
You can't really avoid it.
Have you played through the whole Suikoden series?
Yes, I actually did that a couple of years ago. I did what I called Summer of Suikoden, and nice. At that point in time, I'd only actually played 2 and 3, so I played through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in order.
You went through 4 even.
Actually, so 4 gets a bad rap. I feel like it is not a terrible game. It is just not a good Suikoden game.
Yeah,
it is probably the best way I can put it. So if you just kind of accept it for some of the camp that it has in it, it's actually pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, I think with Suikoden 3, I love the story in that game so much, and I feel like a lot of the gameplay is just wonky and weird. The dual character system,
yeah,
hated it.
It certainly is something different. You had to adjust to it for sure.
I appreciate that they tried something new, and the 3-character story approach was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I actually tracked down the manga of all of Suikoden 3. Have you seen that?
I know about it, yeah.
It's really good. Definitely check it out if you have it. I don't care if anyone doesn't want to talk about Suikoden. We're going to talk about Suikoden for a little while here. And I know you spent quite a bit of time on Suikosource as well. I wasn't active on the forums, but I was looking at character biographies every day.
They have just a wonderful amount of information. That's actually what helped the run significantly, is just that they had all this data already processed, available, kind of easy to look through. And that's something that I talk about a lot in the book, actually, is a lot of people kind of break up the speedrun process as, all right, you do routing, and then you do runs. And from my perspective, there's actually 3 different pieces to it. There's the investigation period, which a lot of people either don't acknowledge or just don't recognize.
Yeah.
And then there's the routing side, and then you do the execution, which is buttons, practice, everything else in between. Investigation is essentially where you build up as much information, data as you can about the game. And because Suikosource existed, a lot of that was done for me. I already had basically all the data that I would need on certain boss fights. I knew how damage formulas worked, and that basically lets me come up with the best decisions way easier. And for a really long RPG, there are a lot of decisions to make that have really far-reaching results.
I know with Suikoden 1, there's a lot of step counting. Is that in 2 as well?
It is not.
No. Well, that's nice.
They yes and no. I wouldn't mind being able to manipulate some things.
Sure.
But just the RNG system changed pretty dramatically between the two games, and the second game's RNG is not manipulable in any way.
Yeah, and I know at RPG Limit Break, Taiho wasn't really cooperating with you.
Taiho put on a good show. He knows how to please.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I was doing my research, and you celebrated an anniversary of your streaming with Suikoden.
Oh yeah. Suikoden was something
so good.
Something that I had inspired by some of the other kind of Let's Plays or otherwise that I've seen, where rather than try and play through a game productively, you actually limit yourself in as silly a ways as possible.
Yeah.
And in this case, I don't remember a lot of the exact requirements that I set out for myself, but one of them was use Tuda at every possible opportunity.
You're so brave.
He is by far the worst character in the game.
Yeah.
Use the squirrels, so use all 5 squirrels.
The most thought out, well-developed characters.
Yep. Use them and use a special technique that they have to kill the final boss, which has a 3% chance of working. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
It's basically, I had to use Luke as a physical.
Yep.
I used some of the other characters who are predominantly magic as physical and predominantly physical as magic, things like that. The only spells I could use were the ones that could backfire. So there's a mechanic in that game where if a character is so bad at a particular rune type, there's a 20% chance that it could just blow up your entire team.
I didn't even know that.
So I only was able to use spells that had a chance of doing that.
Yeah.
It was a fun time.
And how does leaving it to Apple actually pan out? Because I've never done that with the battles. Does she do a decent job?
It's less about what Apple can do and more that just a large number of the war battles are already preset. So very few of the war battles actually, their outcome is more or less predetermined. What you do doesn't really affect what's going to happen. So a lot of it is just kind of for show. There's a couple missions in particular that I did where, yes, you do actually have to use some strategy. You have to kill a certain person who's ridiculously difficult and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And Apple probably doesn't know those things. But you work with what you got. And yeah, it just worked out. It's something that it's another thing that takes it out of my hands, essentially, and adds a little bit more to the show, just because Apple is going to be dumb at times. If not, she's going to light everything on fire. So,
way to go, Apple.
Yep, way to go, Apple.
So how often are you streaming?
I stream pretty intermittently. It's kind of comes and goes in cycles. Lately, I think my most recent set of streams were I was playing through just a casual playthrough of Valkyria Chronicles 4 on Switch. Before that, I was actually going through. I have a Game Boy flash cart, and I was going through basically all the games that looked interesting on that, trying to look for a new speedrun game among them. Some neat stuff there. It's mostly that Game Boy games are wonderful because of how limited that they were in the hardware to play them. But yeah, it's somewhat unusual that I guess you'll see me streaming. I try to stream probably once or twice a week, but it's certainly not a for sure thing, especially if I'm busy with coding Chimera or something else. I'll probably do a lot of that off stream just because it is a little more difficult for me to work on that kind of thing when I'm interacting with chat and so on.
Yeah. Do you have any speedruns you're working on to submit to the next RPG Limit Break or GDQ?
I have a set of speedruns that I'm basically submitting continually now. They're all the runs that I've done that haven't really been in an event yet, so it's just kind of waiting for a new opportunity to show them off. Most recently, I was working on Rune Factory 4, which is a Harvest Moon / kind of dungeon explorer game. And there's a lot of fun stuff in that. I have found some ways to really kind of break it, which actually makes that particular one really interesting to go through. The synopsis just sounds bonkers if I were to talk about it a little bit. But that was actually, there was a remake of it just announced for Switch that's coming out later this year. So that kind of stopped. It's originally on 3DS. So I basically got a pretty good, I want to improve it a little further, run in that game. But it's basically on hold until I get a hold of the Switch game and basically can compare and see which one's more effective to run on.
Cool. And I know that a portion of the proceeds of the book, at least for, is it this week?
This week and part of last week.
Okay. And it goes to
Doctors Without Borders.
Doctors Without Borders.
Yep.
So
$10 from every sale.
So everybody should be buying this book immediately. In fact, this podcast won't be out in time. You missed it. Why didn't you buy it earlier? I'll include it in like the Twitter or whatever.
I'll make sure I save a couple copies for them.
There we go. Where can before our last little segment, where can people find you if they want to watch your streams, if they want to reach out, find the book?
Most social platforms, I'm just Omnigamer. On Twitter, I'm at the Omnigamer, which is probably the one exception. But on Twitch, Omnigamer, YouTube, Omnigamer, all that fun stuff. I actually did just make a personal website, so if you just want to see some of the other projects that I've worked on, you can go to omnigamer.me, M-E, and it'll just kind of list out some of my most significant works, provide links to all my runs and that kind of thing. So you can check that out. To look at the book, just go to speedrunscience.com. It will redirect you to the Fangamer product page where you can pick up a copy for yourself.
And there's an excerpt they can look at too, right?
There's a bunch of pictures of the final product. There's a sample that has some of the chapters taken out directly, so you can read basically the flow and setup. There's a lot of stuff that you can look at that provides you a good idea of what you're expecting in the book. So
definitely go and do that immediately after listening to this. This is Hair of the Dogcast. You can find us on Twitter at Hot Dogcast. Instagram is Hair of the Dogcast. I'm Loaf of White Brad on Instagram and Twitter. I'm on Instagram mostly, but I've been tweeting a lot since I got to GDQ here. So follow us, like us, do all of that stuff, of course. But before we're done, I'm just going to throw you some rapid-fire silly questions.
Oh, boy.
Yep, you don't have to think about them too much.
All right.
Yes. Favorite Keanu Reeves film?
Little Buddha.
Wow. Finally, someone didn't say The Matrix. This is great. I've been waiting for Bill and Ted myself, but no one's gotten that.
Yep.
Little Buddha it is. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Favorite whiskey?
This is a hard question. I just came back from Scotland in March.
So you're a Scotch man?
Yes.
Yeah, I love Scotch.
Yeah. Let's go with... let's do a Dalwhinnie Winter's Gold.
And that's the next bottle I'm buying.
All right.
Favorite genre of fiction?
Sci-fi.
If you were going to write a sci-fi book, do you have an idea for it? Because I know you mentioned you wanted to write one.
Long ago. I don't know that I have one now. I actually, when I was like 13 or 14, I started to write a high fantasy book by itself, but that never went anywhere. I ran out of time.
I wrote a Suikoden knockoff one time
there
in
you
8th
go.
grade. Yeah, it was terrible. Worst Smash character?
Which game?
Melee.
Kirby.
And then Ultimate. There's a lot to choose from there.
Yeah, there is. I don't know about worse. There's certainly ones that I don't like. Oh, man. I do not like... Let's go with Wario.
Wario.
Mm-hmm.
Most overrated Smash character in Melee.
Overrated. Falco.
Yeah, we don't like you, Falco. Favorite game system?
Super Nintendo.
Favorite Suikoden character from any of the series?
Man. You ask the hard questions.
These are the heavy hitters that people are dying to know. At least me.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with Clive.
Clive's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do Clive for now, and I'll change my answer later.
I'm so bummed there's not more games. I want to see the mythos expanded upon. There's so many questions I have. Your favorite rune in the entire series?
I really like the waking rune because of how silly it is. I think that's what it's called. The one that you start asleep.
Yeah.
And then you wake up and you're upset. It
happens
talks about
every
my
day.
life.
Valeria or Kasumi?
Kasumi, because her gear is way better.
You can recruit the ninjas earlier too.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, they both have good runes. The Shrike rune and the Falcon rune are both
The Falcon rune is better on Valeria, and Valeria is a better general. But Kasumi has a lot of unique gear that gives you a lot of speed, and that's like the only way to get that gear. So you always get Kasumi.
And everyone just go play Suikoden 2, more importantly than anything, if you haven't played it yet. Last question, blacksmiths or flying squirrels?
Flying squirrels.
Flying squirrels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're hard to get.
They're hard to get, but they do adorable things.
I do like the concept, though, of 5 blacksmith brothers who wear different colored outfits, and they live in different parts of the world. Poor Moss never got better than what could he get your armor up to? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just a funny concept. Thank you so much, Omnigamer, for coming on. Everybody, check out this book, and check out all of the speedruns that are going on at GDQ and from Omnigamer. I'm gonna probably take the other half of my hotel room back since I don't know if we're doing any more podcasting. Thank you. Thanks again so much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Woo! Let's party.